for folks who are here in person. Our Zoom folks, thank you so much for still being with us. We appreciate your time and your attention to this really important next panel that we have that is titled Reclaiming Black Spaces in Arizona. As I said before we broke, this is a personal passion of mine. I've had many conversations, including a couple with people on this panel, about the importance of coalition building and what that means for Black and African American communities and projects that are going on around the state of Arizona. So I was really appreciative of Brooks and Margaret and Freda for bringing this topic to the symposium to talk a little bit more about this really, really important need for us to coalition build and have the ability to come together to talk about how we can reclaim Black spaces here in Arizona and really project that into all of the work that each of us are doing individually and collectively. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Brooks, Margaret, and Freda. If you can introduce yourselves first, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Jessica, for allowing us to be here. It's always the worst to be right after lunch is to have a panel, so we'll try to keep it entertaining.
I think we turned them back on, but
They
just
should be on.
Yep.
double check.
Is this,
here?
is this on?
Just a little closer, Brooks. Thank you so much.
Like this, then.
Yep.
Be great. And so we're going to try to change the format a little bit from the morning session and talk a little bit about other ways to engage with Black communities. So first of all, we're going to do some introductions. My name is Brooks Jeffery. I'm a professor emeritus from the School of Architecture at the College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture at the University of Arizona. I spent 35 years there doing heritage conservation. I did a lot of community work. I really appreciated Dr. C this morning on some of the outreach work that they did. It was very similar to the work that we did at the University of Arizona. I'm currently working as a strategic planning consultant and startup executive director for Camp Naco and the Naco Heritage Alliance. And we'll hear a little bit more about Camp Naco later on with Margaret here too. But basically, this is a military encampment on the border in Cochise County that was home to the Buffalo Soldiers. And so one of the primary histories of that area is to really tell the story of the Buffalo Soldiers. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And if you are interested, we have bookmarks here too that have QR codes to websites. You're welcome to take one afterwards. So Margaret, why don't you introduce yourself?
Gladly. Margaret Hangan. I am, well, as I like to say, my day job is that I actually currently the acting forest archaeologist for the Tonto National Forest. For those who are not familiar with the Tonto, that is literally the forest that is north of Phoenix. We manage 2.3 million acres. And my role is basically to oversee the management of the archaeological resources for the forest. I also happen to have this other role, and a fairly new role to me, which I'm still learning. And that is, and I'm proud to be the first chair of the Naco Heritage Alliance. It is a newly constituted board. So they've always had a board, but this with as you'll learn, an influx of funding came an opportunity to broaden the board and broaden the scope of the board. And so my role is that of the new chair of a board that is still developing. And we'll talk a little bit more about the history of NACO and how we got here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Freda Marshall. I am the executive director of the Dunbar Pavilion. And what is the Dunbar Pavilion? Many people don't know. The Dunbar Pavilion, or the Dunbar, was the segregated school in Tucson, established in 1918. However, it was not the first school. There was a school prior to that was the colored school, which was small in attendance, but as the population grew, the school district acquired a 2-room house, and that's where the Black children were, I don't want to say forced, but they were that's where they went to school. And right now you'll learn a little more as we talk about reclaiming Black spaces. It is now a cultural center. It's not a multicultural center. It is a African American cultural center. And we hold events. The classrooms are now spaces for small Black businesses and organizations. We hold community events and celebrations there. I want to just plug this in as we continue the conversation. This is a place that we have created. It's a community within the community. And it's a place where the Black community can come and feel welcome and feel safe and be unapologetically Black. And so we pride ourselves on that and keeping that space. So we'll talk a little more about the Dunbar, but I'm glad to be on this panel.
Great, thank you. So why are we here? So the session is really going to be organized based on a couple of, if I can move the slides. Connect button. No, could you just advance the slide then? Great. So a little bit of background context. Next slide, please. You're going to have to stay there. So we're in the process of me taking over the Naco Heritage Alliance and starting the Camp Naco project. My first role was to reach out to a number of different communities, including the Black communities, the Buffalo Soldier communities, meeting folks like Margaret and Freda in that process. And it was very clear that there was a growing interest in just not only recognizing, but interpreting and celebrating Black history in Arizona. So communities, then institutions, organizations, and individuals were all part of this process. And we realized that there were so many people that were beginning to collect all kinds of media, archival materials. A lot of people were dedicated to preserving historic sites and then conducting oral histories because many of these stories were both complex and sometimes tragic in the process of doing that. And then finally, what we realized was that these efforts were happening often in silos. And so part of the reason that we're here today is to think about how can we all work together toward a common purpose. And that's really the purpose behind this kind of session that's here today. So what we're going to do for our session today, our goals are two. One is to facilitate a roundtable discussion and hopefully identifying some of the Arizona's many Black collections and sites. Their stewards, the folks that are there to manage and to advance them, the curators, as well as the champions, those who may not have an expertise, but are the ones who have just taken the banner and flown with it and have just made things happen because they are as important as any of the scholars that are involved in this. And then second is really to determine whether or not we should be creating something, an organization, a consortium. And this was a conversation that came out of a discussion with Jessica along with Margaret, is to really say, is there a reason to bring together folks and then have them move forward? And so we wanted to bring this to this symposium to really just have that conversation. So what we're going to do then is we're going to frame the session around three kind of questions. One is, what are the challenges that are facing the communities, institutions, organizations, and individuals? That's you all. Second is, what are the resources that are currently unrecognized? And then third, what would a larger statewide consortium look like? And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the panel that's up here already. And then we'd like to open it up to you all, as well as the folks that are on Zoom. So I'm going to let Margaret maybe start. And you don't have to address all of these, but it's an opportunity to use this as a framework to really listen. And I'm going to be taking notes. And so toward the end of the session, I'm going to summarize what parts of the discussion that we've had here, and then we can move forward on some next steps. So Margaret, do you want to talk?
Yeah, I will kind of start out where some of this came out of and I know I work for the Tondo National Forest here in Phoenix, but I actually live in Williams. So I live in northern Arizona. I was the forest archaeologist on the Kaibab for 15 years. W- Um, when you live in northern Arizona, especially, you become very siloed because it's very obvious that there's a lot of stuff happening in Phoenix. There's a lot of stuff happening in Tucson. There's stuff but there is not a lot of communication across those areas. And especially in northern Arizona, where people don't realize how widespread the Black history actually is in northern Arizona. Yes, there's a lot of Black history in northern Arizona, and and I'm sorry that Dr. Pratcher is not in the room, who will be talking about this in the next session, so I won't go into any detail. However, I will say that what became very clear is that there was a handful of us, because I happened to step out and give a presentation. I instantly became one of the experts. There's a handful of us who have an interest in this history, but it's also very clear that we shouldn't be alone. She needed to start reaching out to other people. Jessica came into mind because she is heading up the Black Archives. So which is a great resource for those of us in northern Arizona, to start coalescing information about that we're gathering in northern Arizona and having a place for it to go to. And more as I started reaching out, especially when I came down to the Tonto a couple of years ago and started networking with people here, and then eventually meeting Brooks, it became very obvious to me that there's a real need for us to have places for where we can communicate and exchange information and resources and support each other. Because we've all been operating, basically trying to gather a very small community, bits and pieces of it, but we all have great stories to tell. But those stories in themselves are not siloed. We're telling them siloed, but they're not siloed. I mean, it's a statewide story. Many of the people in northern Arizona, when the timber industry died, ended up coming down here to Phoenix and Tucson because these are other opportunities. So we really need to see this story as a statewide thing, but there was no real place for us to have these statewide abilities to communicate. That's where the idea of coming up with an intentional coalition where people representing different aspects of the state history could come together and start to build, to network, to talk to each other, to find out what we're all doing, share information, and share resources. And that in that way, I think it's really that's one of the best ways we can get at protecting these places, because what's happening because of this lack of coalition resources, we're losing these places. We're losing these places that represent Black history in this state. And part of that is not because of a lack of desire. Part of it is just simply where there's no resource available to help to protect these. Now with Randolph, the community of Randolph making its way onto the National Register and recognition of other communities such as Okemah. These are great success stories, but on the other half, we're losing things. For instance, the Black Elks Club in Winslow is basically imploding because there's nobody there to protect it and to champion it. So those are the kinds of things that I think through a coalition and people working together, that we can come up with the resource to identify these places and help them protect them. I'll let you.
I'm going to take this off. I feel like I'm at a hearing or something. I categorically deny. No, sorry, that was bad. That was really bad. So I'm just going to speak about the organization, the Dunbar. So when desegregation and all of that happened, and our historic facility was just shut down for decades, alumni of the Dunbar got together and formed a coalition to purchase the campus that the city couldn't give away. Nobody wanted it. But they did charge the coalition $25 to purchase 52,000 square feet. So I would say, I'm going to answer this question. What are the challenges? One, the Dunbar Pavilion, the Dunbar community is situated in a community that used to be historically or predominantly Black or a community of color, and the entire neighborhood is gentrified. I think there's probably 1 or 2 Black families. And so we've got this wonderful piece of history, structural history within a community that did not want it to be revived. And so the Dunbar in itself is a vulnerable community. It is a vulnerable place. And so protecting it and preserving it has not been an easy task. And it's taken millions and millions of dollars just to get it to a point where it's even habitable. But it is a community within a community, because when desegregation happened, it dispersed what was the Black, warm, welcoming, nurturing community in Tucson. And so there really is no Black community or Black neighborhood anymore in Tucson. And if you know about Black culture, we thrived on community. So Dunbar wasn't just a place for education, but that's where teachers and parents, where family and children felt warm, they felt welcome, they felt celebrated, they felt supported. And so that's what reclaiming the Dunbar is for the Black community now, is having that place where the Black community can feel welcomed and celebrated and supported and nurtured. But it is a vulnerable community. It is a vulnerable organization. It is a vulnerable structure. And so I think the fact that many of you never even heard of the Dunbar Pavilion, it being the segregated school in Tucson, that you know what some of the challenges are and the history that is untold, unshared, and people don't know about. So one of those are the challenges, is preserving that place, and the funding and the resources that don't pour into the Dunbar to preserve that, to preserve the legacy and to preserve the history of that place for the Black community in Tucson, which is small and is dispersed. And we do operate in silos. So it's not just about the collecting of the archive, the material archives, but it's preserving the legacy of community into, or not even preserving it, is reimagining it and bringing it back. So it's not just the pictures and the artifacts, it's the sense of belonging that was displaced, that went away with desegregation.
Freda, when we talked earlier, you talked a little bit about the stigma associated. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Where people don't like to say Black. Yeah, it's so, and I'm not a native to Arizona. I'm not a native to Tucson. And so collecting stories, and I think a little later we'll be talking about the oral stories and collecting of history, which sometimes proves to be very difficult. And Berlin works really closely with us on our archives. I think someone earlier said that, some people are ashamed of the experience that, during segregation, or they don't want to talk about it, and that those stories have not been passed down to generation to generation, and some of them don't feel like their story was good enough, or it's not valuable. And every story, every account of the struggles, the resiliency, and the celebration is important. But there is a certain stigma attached to wanting to call anything Black, and I think that kind of contributes to the challenges that the Black community has in Tucson now, where it's very difficult to pull and engage Black people. And I'm on social media, and it's so interesting that there's so many groups that are formed on Facebook. It's Being Black in Tucson, and Black Arizona. And it's a shame that we've actually got to create those groups so that people can find people that look like them, you know. And so for us in Tucson, when people get to experience the Black experience at the Dunbar, then they realize, this is home. I can probably, the Dunbar is the only place in Tucson where you'll see a bunch of Black people together at the same time, because you can go a whole day and 3 or 4 days and not see anybody that looks like you. That's how dispersed we are. But there is sometimes that stigma, and I think it's systemic. I think it's taught hate for our own race and culture, where we kind of disown who we are. And so we don't want to share. It's almost like we're afraid to celebrate our own culture. And that's why preserving the Dunbar is so important. The work that we're doing for Black businesses, for Black-led organizations who target services for the Black community, is so that people don't have that stigma of it's okay to collect, it's okay to connect, and want to commune with people that look like you, and be able to express those shared experiences, because racism is still very real. Those experiences are still very real in Tucson and everywhere else. But we want to rid people of that, you know. And if we don't do it at the Dunbar, because we are, besides a church or maybe a bar, we are that brick and mortar place in Tucson that Black people can call their own. We are the only, besides a church and a bar and maybe a barber shop, that people can commune as a community, a Black community. So we're trying to get rid of that stigma that it's okay to celebrate. We're not exclusive. And I always say this, and I hope it comes across authentic and real. We're not exclusive of any other race or ethnicity. We are intentional about providing space for Black community to enjoy and celebrate our legacy, our history, our contributions to Southern Arizona.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to sort of shift it over to the audience, and would like to open it up, and we're going to kind of have a back and forth going on here. So if there are people who are interested in participating in addressing some of these questions, please share some of your own experiences, particularly around the second pillar, which is, you know, what are the resources that are currently under-recognized? Mm-hmm. We've been hearing a lot about that this morning already. Things like South Phoenix and the story of South Phoenix, Okima, and, you know, some of these other places. But it's not just tangible places. Mm-hmm. There's also stories and traditions that often get lost because they're not recorded and they're not passed down to subsequent generations. And so we're interested in listening and having this be a part of perhaps the basis of a forum that would then become a consortium. Yeah, Bruce.
Okay, thank you. You know, I got to say something. So for me, go back to the first question, what are the challenges facing communities, institution, organization, individuals? I think one of the things that we lack is Black curators. We don't have a lot of them, and we don't get a lot of support. I'm one of them, and we don't get a lot of support doing the work that we do. And if you think about it, just about every city you go to, there is an area where you can go. In Mesa, we have a new Asian district. Well, the Black community is still there, Washington Escobedo, but there's nothing there to go and rejoice about. And so we are now what they call a heritage neighborhood. We got that honorary. And I'll just be frank with you about it. We got hoodwinked about it. We thought we were being historical. We thought we were having some kind of protection, but we're not. It's heritage. It's just a name, doesn't protect us from anything. And I got real pissed off about that. I said, you know, we trusted you. You followed your lead. So including those people and having a place where you can go and get, you know, some Black culture. We don't have that. The Carver Cultural Center is there, but it's not open most of the time. There's no place to relate to it. So I think getting in touch with those historians and curators and filmmakers and performers and saying, okay, we want to bring you in not only into the Black areas, but the mainstream areas. You know, think about it. Scottsdale celebrating Juneteenth. Scottsdale? Come on now. Okay, it was a sundown town. Let's get serious about it. I mean, they're celebrating it, but what do we do? Mesa, we did it the first time, but someone did it before. So I think the big thing is, how do you include those folks that are doing the work? And you can't do it for free. You know, can't do it for free. You got to have funding. You know, I'm creating projects, I'm putting them out there. So I think that's one of the ways to make things happen, and have a place where you can go and you can communicate with folks and kind of thing. So address that. What are you trying to do? How are you trying to bridge that gap? We're forgotten over in Mesa. They kind of forget there's some Negroes over there. I know y'all just write us off, man. But we're there. We're still there. We're happening. And we need to be included in these stories. So, you know, what are we doing and how are we going to make that happen? And then I'll sit down, shut up, but I'll be back.
No, I think you're right on. I mean, I think it's the idea of how do we showcase under-recognized communities, right? Whether they're in Mesa, I don't know how many, you know, and again, I learned so much about Black history in Arizona just from the Camp Naco project. And how many times I said, I didn't know there were Blacks in fill in the blank, right? Because we don't know about them. And, you know, our challenge then is to say, how do we then educate the next generation to make sure that the, you know, the things that we're not doing don't have to be repeated.
I just want to add, you're not the only one. I mean, where I am in northern Arizona, most people are familiar with the Black communities of Flagstaff. And I always keep and Jess has heard me many times. Williams has a Black church that was started in 1959. Winslow has an active Black church. Holbrook has an active Black church. There's a Black church in Lakeside. There are Black communities, isolated Black communities in northern Arizona are left over from the logging that happened up there. There was a major diaspora there, but those folks are isolated and people are not reaching out to them to grab their stories or to ID all the histories that they have or the places that are important to them. So Bruce, I feel you, and you're right down here in Mesa. This is across the state.
I just wanted to very quickly read a comment from the Zoom chat. This is from Catherine Leonard at the State Historic Preservation Office. And she said in this comment, Bruce, please reach out to us at the State Historic Preservation Office to discuss a National Register listing for Washington Escobedo. So I can get you Catherine's information if you would like, Bruce, and we can get you in contact.
Ariana
with her.
Urban is over there. Is also from this.
Excellent. So there is somebody from Catherine's office in the room. So please reach out to Catherine and her people, Bruce. They are very interested in talking to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
Absolutely not.
No, it doesn't. And for those who are not familiar, they're with the State Historic Preservation Office, which oversees much of the Ariana, you can tell her.
Oh, no, that's not necessary. We do a lot of bureaucratic stuff at the State Preservation Office, but we also try to participate as much as we can in recognizing and preserving, if you will, all kinds of places, and most especially underrepresented, historically marginalized places. So, you know, we've dabbled. We don't have a lot of staff to do this, but I was looking at the discussion questions, and the idea came to mind about mission building and Brooks, learning about the process that you all went through to really arrive at your mission statement and your values for Camp Naco, for the Alliance, and for the future of the site. I think it's really important because we all want to do this. We all know that it's, you know, good to preserve Black places for the sake of preserving Black places. But sort of a double yellow line for us to follow is, I think, important. So we can coalesce around an actual mission statement.
I see a hand on the Zoom room. So let's see if we can get this working. Let's see if we can get this person to go ahead and ask their their question. Okay, Kai, if you can unmute, you are able to go ahead and ask your question. Maybe, hopefully. We've been having some difficulties with this. So Kai, if you are unable to mute, please ask your question in the chat as well. We would love to hear from you.
I'm wondering, in the meantime, Margaret, if you wanted to talk a little bit about the proposal that you're putting together.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that is happening, and Catherine Leonard certainly can talk a little bit about it. There's two things. One is 2 years ago, a group of us got together. So Catherine, the SHPO's office and the Arizona Preservation Foundation, and put together a proposal for a grant through the National Trust African American Action Fund to basically put together, hopefully, an overall guidance, hiring someone to put together a guidance around looking at the Black experience in Arizona. We did not get that grant. However, that really brought us an opportunity to really talk more about the fact that there was this need to bring in some bigger picture information. And so we are trying to go after a grant again. And this time we've invited Jessica Salo and Dr. Anthony Pratcher to help us develop it in hopes to actually, again, go after funding to start pulling together some overarching overviews and picture about a bigger picture about African-American history throughout the state. And then the other effort that's going on, if AnyMuck will actually get some money this time, we'll see. But still, the effort is worth it because it brings some great conversation and some great partners together to start talking about this. The other effort is with Dr. Helen Erickson over at U of A. She and I are going after funding to actually put together a African-American history story map through an Esri story map for those who are hopefully familiar with that. Very similar to what was done for Camp Naco. And if you have not had a chance to take a look at it, do please. And but very similar, where we're going to be highlighting not only Buffalo Soldier activity within the state, Dr. John Langolier, doctor, isn't it? He's got a new book coming out next in February, which will focus in on the Buffalo Soldier experience, history of the state. But we'll also be doing exactly what we talked about, IDing these places, including Dunbar, where there is known representative Black history in this state. So it'll not only do the location, but there'll be photos, hopefully a story about that place. Not only its history, a little bit of its history, but its current use. So we can, and this will be made available to the public. So the whole idea is starting to develop these resources that people can actually tap into to learn about this history, because it's much broader than I think people realize. I'm hoping we won't get it all, but this will be a place to start to hopefully get people to realize how broad this history really is.
There's a question over here. Ree?
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Ree Lindegren, and I'm a dancer and a videographer, and I love archiving dance and filming it. And I'm really curious about resources for different kinds of dance forms from the African diaspora and what that representation might look like in Arizona. I know that, we should chat. Cool.
Yeah.
And I know that like some of my friends are leading like piano, like a South African dance form that's kind of got like a local scene happening here, but I wasn't sure what other kinds of resources there were in preservation that's happening around it.
I'm not the one to talk about it, but maybe others here.
Yeah, I don't, let's put it this way. I'm not either aware of it, at least certainly not in Northern Arizona. It may be happening. I'm just not tapped into it.
Yeah, there are a couple of just small repositories that I know of. Obviously, I'm totally blanking on your name. Kawambe, yes, is definitely one of those, and working with a lot of them to capture that history, because it's not only ASU history, but it is community history as well. And I know that there's a couple of smaller archives that are surrounded either dance or performance. So here at ASU Library, we have the it used to be called the Child Drama Collection, but I am blanking on what the new name of the collection. Youth and Theater Collection that is curated by our colleague Kaylin Ross. She is very dedicated to incorporating more Black and African American and BIPOC, especially youth theater things into the collection. And then also there is the collection that is with Haida. Sean was here earlier, but she is not in the room. But that is also here on ASU campus in Bulldog Hall, is where they called it the cross-cultural dance collection was the last time I remember the name of it. Yeah, and so those are the two that I know of specifically here at ASU, but there could be other ones, and I'm gonna let our Kwambe representative talk a little bit about.
Just a couple of, there are two individuals down in the Tucson area, Denise Bay. Her whole family has a long history with traditional African music, drumming and dance. Barbia Williams is down in the Tucson area as well. And there is something that goes on up north. I don't know if it's like the Prescott area or the Flagstaff area. I don't have a name for you, but I could get a name. Our group, Kawambe, has been operating. It's a Phoenix-based group, but we've been all over the state. We're celebrating 40 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, really excited to hopefully get Kawambe and the history of Kawambe into Black collections. I think that that would be a really excellent addition to, again, not only understanding the ASU history, but the community history that Kawambe has really contributed and done around the state of Arizona.
Can I answer or talk about the second question about what are the resources that are currently unrecognized? And when we were breaking for lunch, someone pointed out the memory room. And I know that, you know, and I'll just speak specifically for Dunbar. One of the things that we're doing and have been working on is capturing those voices. And so under recognized resource are the people. It's people, but knowing how to shape the conversations and approach the conversation, especially with those who feel their Black experience early on was undesirable, or the stigma or the shame is, how do you approach grandma or great grandma, you know, and even pulling out, allowing them to remember some of the experiences that we need to capture about Tucson and about the Black community that we can pass on, you know, to generations, because it won't be taught in school. And so we have to have those fireplace conversations with the next generation. But we have a collaboration with the U of A, where we have this really immersive technology that we use, and we have volumetric equipment, and to allow people to come in and share their stories. And so you may see Grandma Betty or Grandma Lynn on a hologram, you know, and where she's able to, you know, you can pull her up in front of your fireplace if you want, but it's really, they won't come to us. We have to go to them, and we have to equip people with how to, because there's a lot of trauma still. People are still experiencing a lot of trauma behind their Black experiences. And how do we adequately approach the people resource, that the keepers of this history, that you won't see in special collections, or you won't see in our very own archive room? How do we tap into those resources? Because we have our historian at the Dunbar who was a student at the Dunbar, and she will tell you that she's one of the last who know a lot of the history that you're not going to find in the pictures, because if they haven't all passed on, they're just not capable of remembering or articulating experiences or sharing the history. And so, you know, I tell her, Ms. Barber, you can't leave. I still have a lot to learn, but she is a large keeper of information about the Dunbar that we still need. But I know that somebody talked to their grandma, somebody talked to someone and may have a little more information out there. And so the people are the unrecognized resource. So we're working to have people come in but that's our plan, to have people come in and share their experience. What did your the descendants of those who lived around the Dunbar or who went to the Dunbar, what stories did they share, and be able to capture all of those before it's too late. Because we don't know how to ask the questions, and there is still a lot of trauma related to some of the experience, but there's a lot of joy and celebration. The Dunbar produced lawyers and journalists and book writers and authors and all of that, and we want to be able to share that as well.
Others in the audience that would like to contribute to this? Just in the back? Oh, I'm sorry, or in the front.
Let's go this way and then I'll go that way.
Hi, I'm with Desert Botanical Garden. My name's Myra. To answer the first question, I would say the challenges that we are facing, I would say transportation to get the community over to the garden, and ticketer pricing when we hold our events that are specifically outreach events. So we do hold Juneteenth, Black History programming, API programming, but to make sure that our ticketing prices are accessible to the community as well. But another challenge I'm having is trying to make sure that my outreach with the garden and reclaiming it as a Black space is connecting it back to our mission. So are there any archives out there that show representation of Black horticulturalists, Black farmers, Black gardeners in Arizona? I would like to continue doing programming on that in the future.
First of all, I love the botanical garden. I think just Black people in outdoor spaces as a whole, working for the Forest Service, I know this is a huge challenge. For anybody who manages outdoor spaces and nature and that stuff, it's very much of a challenge on a lot of different levels. This is a thing we talk about a lot within the Forest Service. But you're right. People recognizing that there is a place for Black people, and that in fact, Black communities, that we have a history with these outdoor spaces. I think that is one of the biggest challenges we have. We were always outdoors. We were always in agriculture, and more people are beginning to go back there and recognize that. But there's been this disconnect thanks to urbanization and people going north out of the South for right reasons. Don't get me wrong. And that's where it's like the timber industry was really unique in northern Arizona, because you had logging people from the South going into logging in the North, which was a unique aspect of a diaspora. But yeah, that is a challenge. And that's definitely a conversation that I think should be part of this overall coalition, because these outdoor spaces belong to us all, and we all need to be a part of preserving them and a connection to them. So I completely agree with you there.
One of the good things, the Dunbar does have garden space. We've got about 11,000 square feet of garden space, and we had as I say, we are home to small Black businesses, and we have a Black business. Trutopia is there now, but we are reimagining that space, because we do know that we were in those spaces, and there is some trauma related to agriculture. And so our goal is to, it will be renamed. This is hot off the press. Nobody else knows this, so don't take notes. But it will be the Dunbar Cultural Garden. And so what our goal is to have workshops and teach people about seeding and growing agriculture, things that are unique to us, unique to the culture, unique to our DNA, and really and that's a healing place as well. So it's going to serve multiple purposes. People will be able to learn how to grow, but also reconnect with who we were before and help heal some of that trauma that stemmed around that. So we should connect.
There's a question in the back.
Yeah, we'll go back.
Hi, my name is Vina. I am a Indigenous archivist and librarian, and then the stuff that you're talking about, and I'm glad you guys talked about a lot of healing. We do a lot with our own community with healing, and I think a lot of the lack of resources that is unrecognized within our communities, informing them of what it takes, because when we're talking about oral history, not a lot of people emphasizes on healing through these journeys or incorporating a lot of our psychologists methods into our archival system. So it's a lot of undoing of the systematic procedures that have done to our community. And it's like a lot of importance on community, having community drive their project for that healing, but also to inform our younger generation that we do have a career in archives and how does that connect? Because in my own community, they're not talking about libraries or archives as a preservation, because when we look at library and archives, it's so colonized. But how do we tie that in our culture that emphasizes our community, that's related, that resembles archive? You know, it's like culture keepers, memory keepers. It's also informing our younger generation that there is a career in this trajectory, that this path, it's not just education, it's not just lawyers. We also have to embrace that within our culture. So I think that's a lot of things that's unrecognized, not just from our community, but also I'm sure that's probably your community too, because we face that a lot. Like there's so many, very few archivists like me in the field and talking about our way of healing, incorporating our Indigenous way of knowing in these practices that our community can heal. And so we need to start encouraging our younger generations and our services in incorporating a lot of library and archival workshops and career and all those things. So I think that's one of the main things that's just so under-recognized in our community. But also another thing is our generational, that to inform our elders, that we have our elders who are so resistant of archives, how we can inform them that this is our healing and educate them too. So that's a huge gap in our culture, is that generational gap. Our elders are so resistant to documentation because of what was used against us. But we have a younger generation that's so well versed in documentation. So how do we close that gap? Is we have to inform our students, our community from both generation, you know, there is value and purpose, and you know that our way of healing is having the community lead those community initiatives.
Absolutely. Can I
Yeah,
know
go
you
for it.
want to,
Yeah.
you are, when I say that the Dunbar is one of those vulnerable communities, and a lot of the trauma has birthed mistrust, and it's very difficult working with large institutions because you are watching and making sure that injustices don't continue. And so we are not present in those spaces in the libraries as archivists, and our elders are very leery because it's sometimes the story has been collected and have been retold.
That's right.
And so we are protecting, and it makes sense. And so we need to see us in those spaces to build that trust, to know that my story is going to be told accurately and it's not going to be used against me, but it's going to be told in the way that I've told it, that I shared it. And so we don't, and even, you know, this is not to speak negatively, but I love collaboration and I love partnerships, but sometimes we have to reset boundaries for bigger institutions that want to partner. I use that word partner. I don't partner a lot. I'm in the position where I can say no to people that in times past the Dunbar has been vulnerable because of a lack of knowledge. But we have to be really careful with using that word partner. I like to say collaborating, but it is, you know, when we collaborate, we don't see people that look like us. And we can say BIPOC, but when I say intentionality, I'm talking about the Black community, and we don't see that. That's not a career path. That's not, you know, a desired, or maybe we just don't know that there's the need, and we need to inform people that we also need you to be the keepers of history as well. Yeah, it's just, you know, it's how do we reclaim Black spaces? We've reclaimed it, but how do we keep it? How do we keep it? How do we maintain it as a Black space? And that, I think that will always be the challenge, because these places like the Dunbar will always be vulnerable because there is not funding always readily available for these spaces.
I'd like to also add, yeah, one of the things we got to be careful about when collecting this information is not re-victimizing people while in the process of collecting it. The other aspect too, as I'm finding, is that a lot of people don't realize that our history, our ephemera, and I know Jessica is very good about really educating people that this stuff does have value. Now, either our elders don't trust it, or they don't even recognize that what they have, whether it's oral histories, photos, whatever documentation actually is valuable, has historic meaning. That these places that may look run down now have historic value also. No, because our concept of history and our concept of historic preservation is often centered around preserving places that have a certain look, that has a certain meaning, that is attached to a person of great means and knowledge or whatever. And that places that are of community based aren't architecturally important or whatever, that those places too have value and have historic integrity, have historic value, and should be preserved for that reason. And a lot of people have been kind of brainwashed through the system to don't think that those places are important. They are. They're important because they represent our history. And those documents are important because they represent our history. Those oral histories are important because they represent our history. We need to get our folks to recognize how important they really are, and to recognize that, yes, they do have value. And so until we get that, we're going to continue to lose this information. And some of it's just out of ignorance, or just they've been well schooled to think that unless you are a certain level in our society, what you have isn't valuable. And intentionally or unintentionally, that's the message many of us have gotten. We need to turn that around. And that's where I think that coalition especially would come in, because then we can all share together. Because yeah, we are a small community in this state, but I think working together, we can help to elevate and to educate and to help people recognize that these places and these people and this history and this knowledge is important, and we need to hold on to it. But we need to work, I think, to be effective, we need to work together.
There's a question up in front here. And that may be our last question, I think, before we need to wrap it up.
Sorry, there's a column in the way. I can't see sometimes.
Not really a question, but you know, the state is pretty big. And, you know, I've learned so much about things that I had no idea about today. And like Bruce was saying, you know, he's got the visual piece. I mean, I think part of the coalition, if we could figure out ways of sharing the information visually, you know, there are podcasts and they're talking podcasts, but they're also visual podcasts, just little glimpses to share so that more people know where places are. And if they can't physically get there and travel, maybe, you know, a whole tour of the Dunbar Pavilion, or, you know, but just different ways of us connecting. In terms of the Desert Botanical Garden, there is a former Mercury player, Bridget Pettis, that has been doing urban gardening things with kids. And I mean, she has a whole foundation about it. So that's one person. There's also somebody in Southern Arizona that had like some sort of botanical, what's it, you know, her own floral thing. I can't remember her. I'd have to look up. But, you know, there's just so much that exists that we just don't know about. And we need to close that gap visually, to not just, you know, with words.
Great. I just want to check to make sure there wasn't anything else online. Okay, great. First of all, I think thank you for all of your input here. I think one of the things that we wanted to understand from the conversation is, okay, now what? And if we have this sort of collective desire to kind of come together to try to coalesce this information so that there is a network or consortium, then what it might look like. What I'm going to suggest is that we have a sign-up sheet here up on the front of the table. If you are interested in continuing this conversation, obviously these symposiums are happening every year, so this becomes a forum for us to gather and convene. But I think there's work to be done. And projects like what Freda and Margaret have been talking about, particularly at a statewide level, are the way in which we're able to at least begin developing a framework to recognize and to celebrate many of these sites, collections, the people, the stories, you know, both tangible and intangible heritage that we're talking about here. And so we need to begin to kind of coalesce this in a systematic way. And so if you are interested, please come up and add your name to this list, and then we'll follow up with an opportunity just to kind of continue the conversation and maybe have more structured conversations. But we wanted to use this as a forum to listen and see whether or not we are off base, whether or not there are other efforts already in place that we don't want to reinvent a wheel. But thank you for all of this input, and thank you, Jessica, for the opportunity to have this forum.
Well, thank you. I really want to thank Freda, Margaret, and Brooks truly for their time and for the ability to bring this really important topic to the table, because as I said, when we opened this is really a passion project of mine in a lot of respects, because I've had so many conversations with folks here in the state of Arizona who are so interested in Black history, but they don't know where to go. And they don't know what is available, and they don't know how to get to it. And there is an active erasure of Black history going on in this state and around the country, honestly. But if you're really talking about this, but and we need to have these coalitions and this support from a number of people who are very dedicated to this, because without this, we're going to continue to kind of have these silos that are very insular and not knowing what they can contribute and what they can provide to the wealth of Black history here in the Southwest, because it is long and it's storied and it has a lot of value. And without that understanding of how we can tap into that particular coalition and build this, we are never going to be able to get past, especially within institutions, a 0 to 2% of known archival collections that represent Black people in this state. And that is a true factual statistic. 0 to 2% of known archival collections in this state represent Black people. And that is a statistic that we found out in 2012 that is still prevalent to this day. So we need the support. We need this coalition in order to increase that number, but then to also let folks know that their history matters and that they're important and that they need to be a part of the record no matter who they are. So thank you, Brooks. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Freda. Really appreciate you. We're going to take a small break ahead of our 3:15.